Hey everybody, welcome back to another Quick Tie with Tim. I'm from Fly Fishing Bow River Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. We want to thank Rocky Mountain Fly Shop for sponsoring this Quick Tie tonight. If you are part of the Quick Tie squad, please let us know that you're here. Drop a comment, okay? We're going to be going through this beauty tonight, Dave's Hopper. We wanted to give you guys a nice little challenge, so we're going to be taking you through a traditional hopper pattern tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. You can hit that little bell. It'll notify you every week when we have a new video come out for you. I'm going to be tying out of my Season 5 kit. You can still grab one if you want one. Head over to our website, www.flyfishingbowriver.com/TNLS5, and you can grab yours today. We are, believe it or not, on episode 9 of Season 5, and we have some good flies coming out of this week. Okay, let's head on over to the vise, and we'll get started. You can see the hopper in the vise right here. Let's go ahead and get our hook placed in the vise out of your kit. Okay. I'm going to be tying with some UTC 140. I'm going to be tying it in like a browny bronze color as it kind of matches the pattern and how we finish with the hair at the end. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get our thread started about a quarter of the way back down the hook. We'll work our thread all the way back to the bend, and then we'll work it back forward a little ways to about the point of the hook. I'll trim out that tag end. The first material we're going to put in is we're going to be using just a saddle feather in yellow. We're going to be grabbing some chunks off of here to make a tail for this fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to grab a good pinch. It's going to probably work out to like 10 or 15 fibers. Come off like that. Now I'm just going to stack them up on top of each other and try to make sure that their tips are semi-even. So I'm left with something like this. Okay, this is what we're going to use for the tail of this fly. I want it to extend roughly a third of the way off the back of the fly. So I'm going to do a quick measurement, get that set, and I'm going to switch hands over. I want this to stay right on top of the hook shank. So I'm going to take kind of my first wrap right here. Then I'm going to lift up on the material, as you can see there, with my right hand, and just keep it right up on top of the hook shank as I take this back. Like so. I should finish off looking something like that. Now the next thing we're going to tie in, and we kind of have to do it in preparation as we're going to be moving back down the fly quite quickly, is I'm going to be tying in a hackle feather, okay? Just standard hackle. Doesn't matter how long it is because we're going to trim it to actually fit this fly. So, but I'm just going to work my way down kind of to the butt end of the feather, like so. And I will tie it in with the stem like this. And then I will trim out the remaining stem here in a moment. Tie that in. I like to kind of fold it back down the hook shank and make sure I got a good grab on it. And now that I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and trim out the hackle, and I can trim out the rest of that tail, the butts of that tail. Okay. Now I'll just take some thread wraps forward, cover up that work, and come back and make sure that stem's down. This is one thing you really want to be sure of, is that that's secure. And then I'm going to bring my thread all the way forward to where I started it. So like I said before, we want it to be about a third of the hook. Okay, so if I broke this hook down into 3 pieces, we're building that deer hair head on this fly eventually. So it's kind of, we're using this as a bit of a gauge as to where that head's gonna be. Now in your kit, you've got this yellow yarn. You can see it's kind of like a rope. It's got 3 strands. I separated one of those strands out, so it looks like so. We're just gonna tie in with 1 strand and work with just 1 at a time. If you go with the whole chunk, it'll be a little bit too bulky in this pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this tied in basically right where I left that thread. So I can extend it a little farther over top, take that first thread wrap, and then I can pull it back down like so. And then I'm just going to take some open spirals. At no point in this process are we going to really try to bind down this material so that it's nice and tight. Okay, we're actually going to go right back down again. Nice open spiral. We're trying to create some bulk, as this is the mainstay of the underside of the body of this fly. And your yarn might kind of come apart on you. Mine just did. So when I get down to this end, I'm just going to retie in the piece that came off, and we'll go right back down again. So I just had that break kind of halfway down on me, so I'm just going to tie it back in. So we're using this yarn right now just to create bulk. That's all we're doing. So nice open spirals back and forth down that hook shank. Okay, now we're gonna go one more time down and back. This time I brought the the yarn kind of to the near side of the fly. So I'm kind of building some bulk on this edge. Next time I go back down, I'm going to push it over towards you guys on that side. Like so. Okay, and right at the end, I want to bring it kind of right back onto the top of the fly. Now we've got an important piece here. This is the butt end of the fly. They're going to call it the butt of the hopper. So I'm going to pull and make a bit of a loop and tie it down. Now that's an over-exaggerated size, but just so you can see it, I would tie that loop down like that, and it's going to kind of create this bubble butt on this thing. Okay, but I'm going to do it a little bit smaller. The pattern calls for your preference size of butt. So whatever you want, you can see it there. I don't want this to be overly massive. I think if you do, it kind of looks funny on this fly. But I can take one wrap down and then take a peek at it, and I like that. That looks pretty good. It's not too crazy big. I'm going to take a couple wraps there just to make sure it's secured, and then I'm going to bring my thread back forward. I'm going to toss a little half hitch in it just to save my work. I'll set it out of the way. And now what I'm going to do with this yarn is I'm actually going to palmer it forward. So now I'm going to smooth out all of that other work just by palmering this forward, covering up my work, covering up all those thread wraps. Just going to palmer this forward. Again, not doing it super, super tight. I don't want to bind it down and take away from the bulk that I've created. We're going to work that all the way forward till we reach that tying point. Then I'll bring my thread back and I'll tie it off right there. Once I have that good and tied off, I can trim that out. Okay, now once again, I'm just going to toss a little half hitch in there. Remember, that's just our save button that allows us to set our bobbin aside if we need to. And now I'm going to come grab this hackle feather, and we're just going to palmer it forward as well. So just kind of open spirals. We don't want to make it too close to each other. But we're just going to work this feather forward. Like I said, we're actually going to end up trimming this down to a proper length, as this is just meant to be some legs, kind of simulating some bugginess or some legs on the bottom of this fly. Okay, so once I have that good and tied off, making sure it's good and secure, a few wraps behind, a few wraps in front, I will come in and trim that out. Okay. Now right away, I just want to pull some of that back, and I'm just going to make sure I have a good little thread dam up against this material. Like so. And now I'm going to come in and trim this right away. So when I'm cutting this down, I'm basically just taking the tips of it off because I want it to look blunt and more like it has visually a little bit more size to it. And if I were to start by cutting on the bottom, I'd be wanting to cut it just inside that hook gap. So that's kind of a good gauge for you, as then you go around, and don't forget the sides. We want to trim the sides, the bottom, and the top, all to that similar length. And just don't forget, if you have a rotating vise, a quick turn of your vise will show you maybe where you've missed something. And there you go. We got our tail, we got our butt, we got our hackle up now. So now the next thing we're going to go to is we have some turkey flats. Okay, it's not something we use very often, but this is what we're going to use to create kind of a top back to this fly. So when we're pulling off a chunk of this, like you can see, I can pull it all apart. Okay, I can make little pieces. But as soon as I push it back together, I can marry those pieces back together. It creates that, that feather just wants to bind itself back to itself, and that's kind of what we're looking for. So I'm going to take off a chunk that's roughly the hook gap in width. Okay, so if I go to my hook gap, I can measure it. Roughly hook gap in width is what I'm going to pull off. And you can just hold it together and tear it off the stem. Okay, so once we do that, we have our butt ends. Don't really worry too much about how it all looks at the moment, but what you want to make sure is that you haven't taken off too much. So I think I have a little bit too much here, a little too wide. So I pulled just a couple fibers out. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to square up where I tore it off the feather. Okay, just cut it like that. Cuts real easy. And now I'm going to bring this up to the top of my fly. And what I want to do is I want it to kind of wrap around the edge of that hackle. It's going to give me this appearance of the top back of this fly. And we are going to end up trimming this tip here too. So don't worry about the shape. Leave it long. so that we have some space to work with it. And you'll see that it wants to fold around pretty easily, but the trick is getting it to fold around without all those individual pieces wanting to come apart. So I like to bring it up to that, onto the hook shank itself here, leaving it a little bit long. I'm pinching it on top. I'm just gonna fold my fingers around it and pinch it. And I'm gonna tie it in right there. Nice securing wrap right away, pull tight. And then when I come up and look at it, you can see it kind of has that rounded appearance, rounding around the edge. I can encourage it a bit, kind of flatten it out and kind of push it with my thumb, but trying not to allow, like I said, the pieces of the feather to come out. Now I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna trim this out. And I'm gonna take a few thread wraps back over top of it, trying to set it where I want it to be. It can be a little bit of a frustrating material to work with at first, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it isn't so bad. And all we're trying to do is give it this mottled back on top and leave it just basically like that until we trim it. So now I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna trim this so that it extends just out into the edge of the tail, right kind of the edge of that butt. And I'm just gonna do like a little bit of a rounded top on it. I'll show you here once I get it trimmed. That's all I'm doing with it, just like that. I know it's super dark, so it kind of blends into me there, but you can see just a little bit rounded, like so. Okay. Now we're gonna get into the fun portion of the fly, where we deal with some kind of funky legs we haven't seen before, and then get into some deer hair. So this is actually, and you're welcome for tying these up for you, because this is not a super fun process, but this is actually pheasant tail double knotted to create a leg. Okay, so now when I tie in these legs, I want it to extend so that the knot goes roughly to the back of the hackle. Okay, and I want to keep it oriented so that the leg is pointed down. Now this can be a little bit tough, but I like to find the position, take a wrap. That one actually went just about perfect, so I'm not going to have to adjust it at all. Okay. Take a couple more wraps, make sure that one's not going anywhere. Now I'm gonna come over to the next one. Do the same thing on the other side. Like so. Now I want these to be fairly matched in length off the back of the fly, so they're fairly similar. Once I get the position, pinch it to the side. Get a securing thread wrap. That one actually sat pretty decent as well. You can see it on that side. I'll just take a few more thread wraps to make sure that's secure. Pull it tight, and then I can trim out the butts. And if at any time they kind of move on you, you do have a little bit of flexibility in trying to reorient them. Now the tricky part comes when we're cutting the deer hair here in a minute, that you don't cut those legs out, because they are quite fragile and they will come out quite easily. All right. To the fun part. Okay, here guys, we have the deer hair. Okay, we got some deer belly hair, whatever your patch looks like, just grab it. We're gonna take a decent chunk to start with, and we're gonna stack. We're gonna stack it because we're gonna make a collar just on the top of the fly. So I'm gonna take a chunk roughly like this. I have it spread out so you can kind of see in width. I'm gonna cut that off at the base. First thing I wanna do is I wanna get all the fluffies out that are on the inside. So I like to just use a comb or a brush. Brush them out. It'll definitely help you if you don't have those in there. They can be a little stubborn, but once you get them out, should be left with something like this. We're gonna go ahead and set this in our stacker. Get it right in there. Give it a couple of taps. Pull it off with the base pointed back down the fly. Okay, there we go. Pinch those right out, being sure we keep nice and level. And now we're gonna be making a collar here, guys, but we only want the collar to be on top. We don't want it to wrap around the edges. I think I have just a little bit too much. I'm gonna pull a little bit out of my stack. And then when we place this on here, we're actually gonna have a whole bunch of the butt ends at the end sticking out a little bit because we don't want to use too much of them. So I want to extend this no more than halfway down the hackle, but probably less, about a third of the way. So you can set it right on there and imagine where that collar is going to be. Okay, and that's where we're going to leave this collar. So remember, if we don't want this to spin around the hook, which I will show you we do in the next step, I need to keep it pinched. So I'm gonna grab with 2 fingers and I'm gonna pinch it right there so it stays on top. Now I'm gonna go ahead, bring my thread around. I'm gonna pull tight, second one a little tighter. Third one, I'm gonna start working it through the butts. You can see me working my thread forward. Now when I let go, my collar should have remained right on top. Okay, top into the edges. We don't want it to go around to the side or around to the bottom. So we want it to just edge on the sides, just like it did, which is perfect. And then we're gonna see, basically, I want you to put a little thumb pressure there, force those butts back. We might as well leave them in there and use them, as we're just gonna be spinning some deer hair now. So I'm gonna bring my thread just to in front of those. Like to kind of work those in, make sure I fill up that gap where the thread was. And now I'm gonna grab a fairly decent chunk, a little bigger than that one, off of my patch. About a pencil width thickness. And this one is going to be the one that builds the majority of the bulk of the head that we will be trimming up. So once I cut that off, I'm going to come in here and do the same thing I did before, and I'm going to comb out all of the under fur. Try to keep your desk as clean as possible. Try to get it in your basket or your waste basket. Once I got all that out and I'm happy with it, I'm actually going to flip this over and I'm going to cut off the very tips of this. So I'm not gonna do it right here to show you, I'll do it over my basket, but I'm just gonna cut just the tips off, okay? This helps us when we're trimming. It allows us to see what we should trim and what we shouldn't, because we don't wanna trim anything that looks like the tip of the feather, because that's gonna be our collar. So here comes deer hair spinning 101 here, guys. Not too hard, we've talked about it before. Be confident in yourself that it's gonna work in the process that I teach you, and I promise it's gonna work. Okay, just be patient with yourself. If you flub it once, grab some more deer hair, do it again. I'm gonna come in here and lay this at about a 45, about halfway through the hair. I'm gonna kind of pinch up here and hold. I'm gonna take my first wrap. Okay, this one's a kind of a light one. I start to flare the hair, but I'm not trying to spin it at all, I'm just flaring it. Next wrap goes in a little deeper. I'm gonna allow it to start spinning, okay? Third wrap, I take through the butts again. I let go, it spins, grab one more for a fourth to be tight, and pull it tight. Don't pull so hard that your thread breaks, just pull it enough that it flares and spins. Okay, I'll take one more wrap. You can see it just keeps spinning. Okay, so it's a 1, 2, 3 wrap process. You add the fourth for strength, and any additional wrap, if you feel like the hair is still a little loose, any additional wrap is just gonna give you a little bit more, security, as your thread is basically the base that holds all that hair in. Okay, so now that I feel good about that, it's not spinning too much for me anymore, so I'm gonna bring my thread forward to in front of the hair, pull that hair back with my fingers. Okay, like so. Take a few thread wraps right there. Make a little bit of a thread down. Pull out any of those little hairs that are kind of in the way. Now, anytime I work with hair or small dry flies, you know I love my half hitch tool, okay? Anything with a little circle hole in the end of it, lots of bodkins have it on it, lots of whip finishers do too. I'm gonna use this to create an easy knot to stay away from that hair. So I'm gonna pull my thread out, I'm gonna wrap it around once, twice, take that, place that right over the eye of the hook. I'm gonna do it twice, double wrap, and pull it tight. My hook slipped in my vise a little bit. I'll bring that back down, like so. Pull that knot tight, and go ahead and trim out your thread. And now this next part, guys, is never gonna be probably as perfect as you want it to be. Anytime we're trimming deer hair, there's always that chance that we accidentally cut something or we over trim or under trim. But what I can say is you can't put hair back on the fly, okay? So don't overdo it. You can only trim it once. So what I'm trying to attain here in a shape, and I'll show you this one I just had in the vise a moment ago, if I can. There's one right here. You see the head. I'm looking for like basically just a little bit of a bullet head with the collar on top. Okay, so really careful not to cut the collar. And as long as we have a general shape of a bit of like a bullet head, a little bit rounded, we don't want it too square. We should be fine. So I'm gonna come in nice and slow though. I'm gonna bend this razor blade a little bit. A razor blade's pretty essential here to at least get you started. Scissors can be kind of tough. I do work with my scissors on this fly, but not until I get a little farther down. So I'm gonna work my way around taking that first little bit off. Remembering not to cut too deep, just little touches at a time, little touch, little touch. I also like to brace off my vise with a finger, use my thumb against the thumb that's controlling the blade, because I want as many points of contact as possible, just to touch a little and not to take too much off. So I'm gonna go to the underside because I don't want, there should be no collar on the underside, and this is always a good place to start to push all the way through, because I'm gonna be able to see what I'm working with there. And remember, those legs are right there, and you do not want to cut the legs, so be really careful when you're working up against the legs. And then I'm just gonna keep rotating and slowly working out those longer butts, because we know the long hair isn't the collar, and they're a blunt ended hair. So I can kind of pull those back against my blade. And now I'm starting to expose that collar so I can start to see it. So that's when I got to be really careful not to cut into it. I like to grab those longer ones, like I said, just push them against my blade. It really helps me visualize that collar. And if I'm quiet, it's because I'm concentrating, trying not to cut too much here. Get to that underside, make sure I clean that totally out. And then I just like to go in here with my scissors. So once I'm to this point, I'm just gonna come in with my scissors and just clean up any little hairs that aren't where they're supposed to be. If I got some long ones up near that collar, I can trim those out. I can kind of isolate the few hair that I want to as I work my way around. I actually like how that shape turned out. Sometimes you gotta kind of work with it a bit and change it up a bit, but overall that shape worked pretty well. I'd managed to not cut my legs off, which is always a bonus. And at this point, guys, I'm pretty happy with this fly. I'm just gonna go in there with a little bit of resin. I'm gonna touch it just close to the eye, making sure that I've got just a little bit of resin on those thread wraps, which I can see right there. It would really be a bummer if that came out and all the hair came flying off this pattern. Try to lift this up in the vise a bit so you can see that tail. And those legs out the side. And there you got it, guys. That is your Dave's Hopper. Not foam, which is different. That's something good. We need to work or learn to use some other materials, and sometimes these more traditional patterns that people didn't have the foam before, and they started tying in different ways. It's good to reflect on those patterns and take some of those things from them and give them a try. All right, guys, that has been the Dave's Hopper. Again, this is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Bow River Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. Thank you to Rocky Mountain Fly Shop for sponsoring the quick tie tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until we see you next week, have a great week, everybody.